Hi everyone, I'm Craig Meidl with the Spokane Police Department. I just want to take a few minutes to talk to you about where we are as a state and more at a granular level, where we are as the city of Spokane as well. I am going to be presenting some data as well as where those sources are to help illustrate where we currently find ourselves as it relates to law enforcement as well. As we're going through the presentation, I'm going to ask you to keep this quote in mind. This is from Milton Friedman. Milton was a famous economist who said, "One of the greatest mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results." So we do a lot of things with great intentions. The big question is, are the results there to support continuing what we're doing or at least trying to do? So I'm going to start out again at the state level. The Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs comes out with an annual report, and what their report has shown was that in 2021, murders in the state of Washington went up almost 6%. The prior year, in 2020, murders had increased in the state by 47%. WASPIC pointed out in their publication that this is the highest number of murders recorded since WASPIC began collecting this data in 1980. So we're seeing, obviously, across the state a significant increase in homicides as well, and this is all going to tie together as I go through the presentation. In 2021, in the state of Washington, again, violent crime went up 12%. Robberies have gone up 12% across the state. Aggravated assaults 10%, and motor vehicle thefts 27%. So what we're seeing is a significant increase. Every single one of those increases is a victim, someone who has been victimized by another. So now I want to take you to the City of Spokane's data. This is current data, year to date. This is all on our website. We post this data every single week. If you wanted to go see where Spokane City is, we call this our comp stat report as well. So when you're looking at our latest data for crime in Spokane, you'll notice that year to date, our homicides are up 12% year to date compared to last year. I need to add a caveat on that. Many of the calls we respond to will not necessarily be declared a homicide until after the medical examiners completed their autopsy or the investigation continues, and at that point it may then be officially categorized as a homicide. You'll see that commercial robberies are up 84%. When we're talking about commercial robberies, many of those are going to be shoplifting calls where the suspect has then displayed a weapon or used force to retain the property. I can tell you that we have heard loud and clear from our businesses that many of them are absolutely being cleaned out by a lot of our repeat offenders who are then going in and using force to retain whatever it is that they're shoplifting. And then robbery of persons has gone up 7% as well. So that's violent crime. When you're looking at overall violent crime, it's up about 2.5% year to date in the city of Spokane. Let's talk about property crime very briefly again. When you're looking at commercial burglaries, these are going to be burglaries of, in essence, businesses. Those are up 55% year to date. Larceny is going to be theft. That's up about 25%. And then vehicle theft in the city of Spokane is up 76%. When you're looking at the state, up 27%. Here in the city of Spokane, it's up 76%. So our property crime in the city of Spokane currently, year to date, is up 27% compared to last year as well. So there's a lot of reasons for this. There's a lot of layers to this. Some of what I'm going to get into will explain that. And then in future episodes, we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that as well. If we could go to the next slide, I just grabbed a few headlines from across the state that shows this violent crime is a statewide issue. This isn't unique to Spokane County. This is happening across the state, and it's not unreasonable to assume that when murders go up, your aggravated assaults are going to go up across the state as well. A lot of aggravated assaults were, but for the grace of our medical advancements, would have been murders. So again, we're seeing significant amount of violent crime across the state as well. I want to go briefly and just talk about staffing again. These are just different layers I'm covering to give you a snapshot of how did we get here. We didn't get here overnight, and there's not just one lever that we need to pull to fix this. So we're going to talk about police staffing. When you look across the nation, according to WASPIC's data, the national average police officers per 1,000 is about 2.33 officers per 1,000. When you're looking at the city of Spokane, we're at about 1.54 officers per 1,000. What that means is if we wanted as a city to have the average number of officers, some agencies have more, some have less. But if we wanted to be about average for the state, we would need over 130 more officers to have the average number of officers. And again, I will tell you, not every city is the same. Some cities, if you take Mercer Island, Bellevue, some of these other places, they're not going to necessarily have the same level of crime as some of the other cities will, such as Spokane, Tacoma. So you probably don't need as many officers in those jurisdictions. But what we do know is that Spokane Police Department tends to be a call-driven agency. So we have a lot of things going on, and our officers stay really busy. So I want to go to a publication that Senator Padden, Senator Wagner, and Senator Gilden came out with last fall, and it's called Prison Alarm Bells. And this is a very thorough review that these state senators did of our prison system operated by the Department of Corrections. And on the right, you'll see the front of that publication. Then when you look on the left, you'll see where the number of inmates is according to the Department of Corrections website. So if you go back to 2018, you will see that there were about 18,000 inmates in state of Washington prisons. Those are prisons across the state, obviously. Fast forward to where we are now in 2022, you'll see that we have well over a 4,000 decrease in the number of beds that are in our penitentiaries. So at the height in July of 2018, 18,000 inmates. In July of 2022, you'll see right at about 13,000 inmates. That's a 5,000 reduction in inmates. So this is a reduction of inmates of about 28% in the last 4 years. And that obviously has an impact. The next slide is going to show you a different snapshot. This is actually taken from the prison alarm bells sounding, which will show you a chart as our population in this state has increased. You'll notice a significant decrease in our inmate population. So this either our population is behaving better, or for some reason we're reducing prison beds, and we're seeing the impact of that. And I think what the data shows from across the state, people are not behaving better. So we're reducing jail beds, and crime is going up in virtually every single category. And then the last one I want to show you related to the Department of Corrections Penitentiary is, again, this is taken directly from the Washington State Department of Corrections website. And when you're looking at the left chart, it will show what the average daily population, that's going to be on the left for each of those months. And then on the right, so for July, for example, you'll see the average daily population was 13,175 inmates in 2021. And you'll see the capacity that the prison had was 16,994. So the reason I'm showing you this slide is that over the last 4 years, you've noticed the decrease in inmate population, and you'll see that the capacity was 16,994 through 2021. But then fast forward to 2024, and you'll see that the capacity has been reduced to 14,650 beds that are available for Department of Corrections. So from 2021 to 2022, you'll see 2,300 less prison beds available. This is the equivalent of shutting down more than one prison. There's no prison in the state of Washington that has 2,300 beds. So what this will show you is that basically from last year, we've done the equivalent of shutting down one very large prison as well. So that's important. And again, I'm going to give you a couple examples as we get through this to show you what kind of impact we're seeing across the city as well as across the state as well. Okay, so I'm going to go to what I think is a very important bill. This is the Engrossed Substitute Senate Bill 5121. This bill was passed last year, and this is basically titled Expanding Eligibility for the Graduated Reentry Program. This bill was requested by the Department of Corrections. The Department of Corrections obviously runs our prison systems in the state of Washington. I want to take you to the next slide. Now, this is going to tell you in a snapshot, what is our graduated reentry program? So interestingly, The background of the graduated reentry program is described as a program to improve public safety. I will tell you that when we have felons with multiple convictions that are being released before their sentence has been served under the graduated reentry program, it is certainly not making our community safer, and I think that's what the data will show as well. So you'll see I circled where are they released to? They're basically released back to the community. The Department of Corrections calls it community custody. So if someone's sentenced, for example, to 3 years in prison and they're released early to the community, they're still technically considered in Department of Corrections custody, even though they're not in prison. They're in a community shelter, and we have these types of shelters and houses all throughout the city of Spokane as well. So that is one of the things where we're seeing the reduction in prison beds as well. So again, I'm going to go into a little bit of what the language is within this bill on the next slide. You'll see that basically what this bill does is it significantly expands the ability for people to get released from prison without serving their full sentence in prison. And in the red, you'll notice that I highlighted an individual under Track 1 must serve at least 6 months in total confinement in prison to be eligible to serve up to the final 5 months in the graduated reentry program. So in other words, if they're sentenced to 11 months in prison, which is actually a fairly significant sentence for many of our crimes, they only have to spend about half of their time in prison, and the other half of that sentence, where they were sentenced by a judge to prison, they can serve that in the community. When you're talking about other crimes other than a sex or a violent crime or a crime against a person, the amount of time they're allowed to spend in the community as part of their sentence goes up exponentially. So someone who's in essence sentenced to a property crime in prison for 22 months, and again, if you get 22 months of a sentence for a property crime, that is significant. That's not a sentence that someone gets for 1 or 2 burglaries. This is someone who has what we call many points. In other words, they have multiple convictions. So if you've been sentenced for a property crime for 22 months, you're only required to spend 4 months in prison, and the other year and a half you can spend in the community. I'm not sure how this keeps our community safer when we're seeing the increases in crime across the spectrum and across the state as well. I'm going to use, if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to use Ray Wynkoop. Many of you may know that Ray Wynkoop was one of 2 individuals who shot at Officer Honecker several months ago and truly, in a premeditated method, was trying to execute an officer. He's currently booked for first-degree attempted murder and first-degree assault and drive-by shooting. He was involved in 2 drive-by shootings right before he shot at Officer Honecker. He has 7 prior convictions for burglary, attempt to elude, unlawful possession of firearm. Because he's a felon, he can't possess a firearm, but he was arrested for possessing a firearm, theft of a motor vehicle, and residential burglary. He also had misdemeanors, which included escape and resisting arrest. So in March of 2019, he actually started his sentence for the crimes prior to attempting to shoot Officer Honecker. In August of 2021, so 18 months later, this is someone who has 7 felony convictions. 18 months later, he was transferred from prison back to Spokane Community Custody. He was then arrested in December of 2021 after being released for attempt to elude a police officer, a hit and run, another unlawful possession of a firearm, and possession of controlled substance with the intent to deliver. So that was obviously just months after he was released from his what should have been a 3-year sentence, and he only served a year and a half. So he gets released. We're speculating under the graduated reentry program, and he should have been in prison at the time of the shooting of Officer Honecker in June of 2022. And according to my contacts at WASPIC, there have been multiple requests from the Department of Corrections for information and data related to inmate populations in the graduated reentry program, and my sources at WASPIC are saying they are not releasing that information. So again, I want to emphasize, what does all this have to do with prison populations, average daily population, graduated reentry programs? Is Wynkoop served 18 months of a 36-month sentence, and he was released to community custody for the last year and a half of his sentencing. That is problematic, and this is only one example of many of the issues that we are seeing across the state. I want to take your attention real quick to a research program that was conducted by Washington State University. Dr. Macon, talked to Dr. Macon at Wazoo on multiple occasions, a very intelligent person. And this study, though this study is about 10 years old, it's still relevant. This is going to be related to property crimes. So if we could go to the next slide, what his study showed, and this was related to Tacoma Police Department as well, and what his study showed, and this is, my sense is this is a peer-reviewed study. So in other words, it's going to stand up under scrutiny. And what his study showed was that the average offending histories displayed by someone who was basically in prison for burglary was on average, they committed 98.8 burglaries on average. And at the lowest level. The highest was 204 burglaries per year. So when we're talking about graduated reentry for property crime offenders, in other words, they only have to spend 4 months in prison and they can spend the other 18 months out in the community. That's problematic, especially when we're looking at our repeat and chronic offenders, which are really the ones that are creating issues across the state as well as here in the city of Spokane. So we're talking about the costs of incarceration. That's what we hear. It costs a lot of money to incarcerate people. And we as a community have a choice to make. Either we pay those costs on the front end for those repeat and chronic offenders that have shown they're going to continue to victimize the community, and we pay that on the front end by protecting the community from them. They have either shown by their behavior or their words they're not going to change their behavior. And so we either have to protect the community from them, or we do things like the graduated reentry program to try to save some money. What this next slide shows is a cost of crime index, and there's multiple studies on here, and what it breaks down is the cost of each crime to society. I'll use burglary as an example. There's obviously different ranges, but when you're talking about burglaries, there's not just the cost associated with the items that are stolen, the damage that is being committed to enter into the residence or the business. You're also talking about lost productivity of employees. You're talking about court time, officer time, prosecutor, public defenders, et cetera, et cetera. So this breaks down the costs of each crime and what it costs to society. So when we're talking about how much it costs to incarcerate these individuals, especially our repeat offenders, you have to look at what is the cost by not incarcerating these people to the community, keeping in mind the number of convictions they've already had, keeping in mind the study from Dr. Macon that shows on average how many burglaries each person committed, again, from the low end of 98 to the high end of 204, and we're looking at the cost of burglaries. I would say that for many of these people who have shown they're not going to change their behavior, it's actually cheaper to society to probably keep them in prison for the duration. And then again, I just want to wrap up the Department of Corrections piece with a quote out of Prison Alarm Bells. On this slide, it shows that there was a massive expansion of the graduated reentry program with the goal of releasing another 3,000 prisoners under the graduated reentry program. And so they talked about the closure of 3,300 prison beds is touted as a means to save $80 million per biennium. That's $40 million per year. And I would ask, these individuals who are in prison are there because they committed the crimes, they've been tried by a jury of their peers or a judge, and they have victimized the community. And Washington State has what's called a point system. So for every felony conviction, you get 1 point. And on this chart, you max out at 9 points. So when you commit a felony, your first felony counts as 1 point, and they follow a sentencing guideline. And as you continue to accumulate points, because you continue to victimize the community, and if you continue to get convicted of felonies, those points increase, and the judge goes down the chart to look at how many points you have, and they must sentence you within that range based on the number of points, felony points, aka felony convictions you have. If they veer from that either direction, they have to have special reasons for why they veer from that. So again, the sentencing guidelines are there for a reason. The graduated reentry program has basically disregarded many of those. So I want to talk to you real briefly too. Our segue is the Kent Police Department had a similar incident within the last couple of months where they had a chronic offender where you'll see the chief of police said he should have been incarcerated based on his prior convictions. So another individual released from prison early ramming police vehicles. And that's going to segue us into one of the videos I wanted to show you was right here in Spokane related to the overall, we're going to switch gears here a little bit, to the overall sense of lawlessness, and I know you've heard the mayor say this before, this legislative lawlessness that's occurring. I'm going to show you two videos right now. These occurred here in the city of Spokane, and it ties into what the Kent Police Department saw as well with the chronic offender who rammed their police vehicle. So if we could show the next video.
Hey, you want to open the door and talk to me, please? Hey. There's... Okay.
So this next video, a different traffic stop, and again, you're going to see what happens when officers try to contact the driver of this vehicle as well.
Back up. Don't let him get this. Back, watch out.
So both of these incidents happened relatively close to each other. These are only examples of similar incidents that we have had repeatedly in this city of Spokane, especially over the course of the last year. These things were very uncommon prior to the last year. One of the other things, as we talk about the changes in the laws and what law enforcement can and can't do, and really a lot of the rhetoric that has been directed towards law enforcement across the nation as well as across the state has had an impact. In addition to this is damage to multiple police cars. Based on the pursuit law that was passed last year, you'll notice these officers weren't getting in their cars to chase this person these two individuals who just committed multiple thousands of dollars to police cars. And they didn't chase them because the law does not allow them to chase them for a hit and run. This hurts the community. These vehicles are going to now be out of commission for 3 to 4 weeks. It is going to cost taxpayers thousands of dollars to repair these vehicles now. So this is not just hurting the Spokane Police Department. This is hurting our ability to serve the community, and it's causing taxpayers to spend money on these types of incidents. And again, I want to reiterate, these are only two examples of what we're seeing more and more frequently, and you're seeing this across the state, as you saw from the article with the Kent Police Department. I also want to talk about the traffic stops. One of our top complaints in the city of Spokane when we go to these different neighborhood councils and these different forums is driving, is traffic. It's the way people are driving. And I would like to go to the next slide if we could. And again, what you're going to see here is, again, across the state, and no different than in the city of Spokane, is headlines that will show people are not stopping for law enforcement on traffic stops now. And this isn't unique to just Spokane Police Department, Spokane County Sheriff's Office. This is happening to Washington State Patrol and every agency, in essence, across the state as well. The word got out. The legislators said what we can and can't pursue for, very, very restrictive. And now we have more and more people every day not stopping. I've been told by our graveyard officers, the officers that work night shifts, that if they're not busy going call to call and they're able to engage in self-initiated activity, they'll have on average two traffic violators that will flee from them every night. Two different stories. One of our officers attempted to make a traffic stop of motorcycles that were racing up North Division, and the motorcycles just took off from the officer at a high rate of speed, came up to a red light. As the officer pulled up behind them, both of the motorcycle drivers turned around and waved to the officer. Light turned green and they took off. The officer can't pursue them even though they're driving 70, 80, 90 miles an hour up Division. And what they then did was circle around behind the officer, drive behind him, and then go past him again. And in essence, we're toying with him. There's nothing the officer can do. And I've heard from our officers over and over again, people aren't stopping. This summer, I just happened to be close to a traffic stop where one of our traffic officers had made a traffic stop. I pulled up next to him, and it was early afternoon, and he'd explained to me that he'd already had 2 drivers fail to stop for him as well. So when we're changing the laws and restricting what we can and can't pursue for, the ripple effect of that has been tremendous across the state, and we're seeing that here in Spokane as well. Okay, I want to talk briefly too about the State versus Blake decision. If we could go to the next slide. This was a Washington State Supreme Court ruling, a 5-4 ruling that basically invalidated Washington's possession of controlled substance law. So what that basically means is that an individual in possession of cocaine, heroin, meth, fentanyl, Mexi pills, all of these different types of drugs, the state had to prove they knowingly possessed them. So our revised Code of Washington law did not have the word knowingly in there. In other words, you had to prove they knowingly possessed these drugs. This was actually a case that came out of Spokane. Officers arrested a female for some charges, took her to jail. At jail, the corrections officers found a baggie of drugs in her pants. She took it to court and said the pants were not hers. She'd had them for 2 days. They were given to her by a friend, but the pants that fit her perfectly weren't her pants. So this case made it all the way to the Washington State Supreme Court, where they said that the state must prove this person knowingly possessed these narcotics. The fix was easy. The only thing Washington state legislators had to do was add the word knowingly to the RCW. In other words, when proving an element of possession of controlled substance, the person knowingly possessed the substances. This did not occur. So we went down this route that we're currently in, at least until the middle of next year, where law enforcement across the state is required to give 2 referrals to treatment on the first 2 contacts for possession of drugs. And on the 3rd contact, they may issue a misdemeanor citation, which means the officer gives them a citation. They make a promise to appear in court in the next 30 days, and they go on their way. So not only did that transfer the costs of possession of controlled substances to the municipalities, because felonies are paid for by the state, misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors are paid for by the local municipality. So transfer the costs of those to our jurisdiction, but it also basically, for all intents and purposes, legalized drugs. And one of the things I hear is that officers are not giving referrals to people. So how do we know if this is going to work? There's a study out of Oregon that has a similar program, which shows less than 1% of the people referred for treatment actually accepted that treatment. One of the challenges we have to make in the city of Spokane is every time you take drugs off of somebody, you have to basically give them a referral, take those drugs to the property facility, place those drugs on property, log them in, write a police report, and then drive back to your area of deployment. So with us being a call-driven agency, we can't justify on most occasions taking drugs from someone, giving them a referral, and then taking that officer out of service for over an hour for only a referral. We will do it if it's subsequent to an arrest for other charges and they're going to property. But in good conscience, I can't take an officer off the street for an hour plus to do nothing more than a referral that the data shows in Oregon, and there's no reason to believe it's going to be different in Washington. This person has a less than 1% chance of actually accepting treatment. We have too many calls. We have too many other higher priorities to do that as well. So that's something that will be coming up in 2023 for our legislators to revisit. And that is something that we will be paying close attention to as well. I also want to talk about the drugs as well. As we're seeing this more permissive attitude towards drugs, I'd like to go to the next slide. When you look at the number of overdose deaths in the last year, and this is from the Center for Disease Control, the number of overdose deaths in the United States in the last year increased almost 10%. When you're looking at the increase in Washington State, the overdose deaths during that same time frame increased by over 26%. So you have almost a 3-fold increase in overdose deaths in the state of Washington in the last year. I want to talk again then about Spokane County, if we could go to the next slide. In looking at the Spokane County Medical Examiner's Report going back to 2014, which is the latest date they have, in 2014 there were 30 overdose deaths in Spokane County according to the Spokane County Medical Examiner's Office. Fast forward to 2021, which is the latest report we have available, there was 190 overdose deaths in the county of Spokane. So when you're looking at just Spokane County, in the last 8 years, we've had a 600% increase in overdose deaths. So what we are doing is not working. Going back to my first slide of if we know these programs aren't working, let's not just do them because they make us feel good. The reality is when you talk to many treatment providers, they will tell you that we have to have, in essence, the carrot and the stick. You have to have the ability to criminally enforce those who possess narcotics. And many of them will go to jail, and while they're in jail, they will dry out, and they will realize at that point, I don't like this lifestyle. I don't like the lifestyle that I'm living. And that's the best opportunity you have when they are not on drugs to get them that treatment. There's also a fallacy that our prisons were full of people who did nothing more than possess drugs. That is absolutely incorrect. Our Spokane County Jail and our prison systems were not full of people who had nothing more than possession of controlled substances. What they were full of is people who committed crimes, murders, rapes, robberies, aggravated assaults, thefts, burglaries, stealing vehicles, and then were subsequently arrested. And then in a search incident to arrest, they had drugs on them as well. So if you're hearing these stories that our prisons and our jails were full of people on drugs, absolutely not true. What they were full of is people who either stole from others or victimized others to support their habit, or that was added on for the primary charge that they were in prison for. Okay, next slide. So here are some of the priorities that law enforcement across the state is looking at. I'm not speaking for all of law enforcement. I would be disingenuous if I did that, but the priorities we are looking at to help provide a more safer community is to address the Blake decision. Again, this will be in front of legislators in 2023 session. And when we see the overdose deaths and the crime rate increasing, obviously many of these people supporting their drug habits through victimizing either the community members and or businesses. We need to address the severe restrictions that were placed on law enforcement pursuits. A language that balances the danger of this person to the community versus the necessity to actually apprehend this person. But as you saw in the presentation, people across the state are not stopping for law enforcement. It's very, very restrictive. We need to stop the silent emptying of Washington's prisons at the increased cost of victimization to our communities and to our businesses. I would wager the vast majority of the people in this state do not realize how much capacity Department of Corrections has reduced their jail beds with the intent to reduce that capacity even more. And when you see people like Winecoop, one of many out on the street with multiple felony convictions, getting released from prison a year and a half, that's only one example. And because we're having such a challenging time getting information from Department of Corrections, we don't have any idea of the scope of how many of these other people with similar backgrounds have been released as well. We need to cease the graduated reentry program until better safeguards and checks are put in place. Our community safety is too valuable and there's too much at risk to release these people without having better checks and balances as well. And then we also need to have our elected support law enforcement publicly. And we need to base decisions on data, not based on emotions. Last 2 years, as many of you know, have been very challenging for law enforcement, and we still have a hangover effect from that. Officers, we're not looking for anyone to stand on the mountaintop and cheer and applaud and say how great they are. We're not looking for that. But neither are we looking to be demonized based on the behavior of a very small few groups of people. In every profession, you have people that let down the profession: teachers, doctors, pastors, and priests, and all these other trusted positions. Why is law enforcement so different? We acknowledge we have people that should not be in law enforcement, and we need to make sure that we're not painting all of law enforcement with a broad brush, because I think what you're seeing across the nation is law enforcement still has a hangover for the last 2.5 years of demonization. And then lastly, we need to base all of the decisions related to our criminal justice system on community safety, both in word and deed. Not what was in the bill where they talked about releasing people from prison earlier to improve public safety. Clearly, that's not the case. I'm not sure how releasing someone from prison early who has multiple convictions and then ends up being involved in a hit and run and being a felon in possession of a firearm again, and then months later shoots an officer. I'm not sure how that creates a safer community as well. Every activity needs to have the community and the victims in mind as the number one priority. And then I'm going to close with this. This is some words from Robert Kennedy. Most of you know Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy said, "Every society gets the kind of criminal it deserves. What is equally true is that every community gets the kind of law enforcement it insists on. We can only use the tools that we are given by the legislators. And when tools are taken away, there's a ripple effect and a consequence for that as well." And this statement I found to be so true 50, 60 years ago, and it's every bit as true now as well. So with that, I thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope you have a great day.
This is Dave Reynolds with Source Real Estate. Our secret is our 1% listing fee. All the services, marketing, photography, and more for a 1% listing fee, saving you thousands. May the source be with you. 999-8878 and visit sourcerealestate.com.